Welcome to the track sessions. This track examines a range of cybersecurity responses on how tectonic shifts in organizational posture can place stress on the underlying IT infrastructure. The following sessions will include Q&A. Take this opportunity to interact with the speakers live. Submit your questions in the Q&A engagement panel on the right of your screen. Joining us on this track is our session chair, Mr. Stephen Sim, Vice President of ISACA Singapore Chapter, who will lead the Q&A segments. To kickstart our track sessions, please welcome Mr. Marco Pereira, Worldwide Vice President, CPS Strategy and Consulting of Trustwave, a Singtel company.
Hi, hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for attending this session. It is a pleasure to be here today, and I would like to thank the GovWare Focus team for inviting me. My name is Marco Pereira, and I lead globally strategy for consulting and professional services at Trustwave, a Singtel company. I've been working and advising clients in cybersecurity for over 23 years across 4 continents. So the agenda for today, we're going to talk about digital resilience and how it is a must and imperative in the post-COVID-19 world. We're going to cover digital transformation acceleration and then kind of the consequences of what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic that is still going on. Very well, so having said that, let's first look a little bit how digital transformation accelerated during the early stages of COVID-19 pandemic. So this is how pretty much I used to describe digital to an audience and the impact of digital transformation from a very high level perspective. So basically with digital, we went from systems of record and systems of control to systems of engagement and interaction, right? That's how we actually measure and quantify adoption, right? So it's all about this constant engagement, constant interaction, and social media is a very good example, but all the digital channels reflect this. And in a way, what happened is that atoms and physical items started moving more into becoming digital assets, either in the form of bits or photons, but a more dramatic thing happened from a way we kind of monetize this interaction. And I always give this example that Facebook acquired a few years ago WhatsApp. And at the time, WhatsApp was a very simple application that only sent basically text messages. And Facebook paid roughly $19 billion for an app that all it sent back then was text messages. The thing is, they had roughly 500 million users, and we planned to grow to roughly 1 billion in 3 years. So the value was not necessarily in the app per se, but in this monetization and this adoption that this technology had, right? This is what drove the value of 19 billion. And the other part is how fast we have been adopting new technology, right? From airlines that took 64 years to reach 50 million users, telephone, electricity. But as we start moving to more digital assets, I think the most astonishing one is internet took 7 years to have 50 million users, but Pokemon Go, an app, a game with augmented reality took only 19 days. And this is pretty much how we were talking about digital transformation and the big impact that it was driving to the industry. But then COVID-19 happened. And I believe this slide, although in a funny way, tries to explain the impact and the acceleration of digital transformation, right? So this image on the right started circulating digital social media. Who led digital transformation in your company, CEO, the CTO, or COVID-19? And then this cartoon actually kind of put it together in a pretty funny way that, the CEO is saying that digital transformation years away, but then COVID-19 happened. We don't really know, we're still in the middle of this pandemic. We don't have all the answers. We don't know exactly what is going to happen. But a couple of things we know pretty well. One is that the future is going to be way more digital. There's going to be a lot more remote working, a lot more remote interaction. And basically, we're going to have a more low touch society and interacting less in a physical way, in the way we do shopping, in the way we kind of consume certain services and certain products. But um, we also know that digital transformation is accelerating and pretty much cloud adoption is leading the way. And I think Microsoft put it really well in their quarterly results, right? They explain that they saw a massive acceleration, for instance, in the adoption of Microsoft Teams that went from 30 million daily users back in July 2019 to 75 million by April 2020. So an impressive 5.8 times increase in just 9 months. And in their blog, during their quarterly results, they pretty much summarized everything that they saw 2 years of digital transformation happening in just 2 months. So the thing with cybersecurity is that there is always a dark side. I've been saying this for a while. There is always someone that is always going to take advantage of this, and as Sun Tzu described, pretty much in every crisis there is also an opportunity. So the truth is, hackers also read the news, and they move really fast, and they adapt faster than even the most agile organizations. Guess what happens when there is this exponential growth in remote users eager to use new devices because they are working from home and really eager to get COVID-19 updates. So just to give an example, I'm sure everybody has used the Johns Hopkins University dashboard. Well, hackers used it too, but for the wrong reasons. So they created fake sites that were pretty much very identical to the Johns Hopkins University site. But what they did is they dropped malware for the visitors that went to those fake sites. And there are endless other examples, mainly around phishing and a lot of emails going around trying to exploit this COVID-19 pandemic. So I really don't want to focus too much on the problem. I want to focus more on the solution, right? How we can actually improve digital resilience. And to understand that, we need to go back a little bit in time, right? Let's travel a little bit back and understand how we have been responding to security over time. So right at the top, we have the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? Identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And pretty much right at the beginning, like late 80s, early 90s, all the focus was around protection. And I have it kind of in a funny way. All we really had to worry was installing the antivirus, which back then fitted in one disk. Maybe if this presentation is being watched by some millennials, they don't even know what this is. So it's a floppy disk drive that contained the solution to all our problems back then. You install the antivirus, and in a way, and I'm exaggerating and I'm making this a little bit funny, but that's all you had to do. We went from installing one disk to now several organizations have hundreds of different security vendors, right? Most of them focusing on protection. So kind of security started with, again, looking to the NIST cybersecurity framework on the protection side. Then in 1995, PS 7799 was published here in the UK. I'm talking from the UK. Later it evolved in the year 2000 to the international standard ISO 17799, which later we all know as ISO 27002. And this was the rise of compliance as being the engine for security being so compliance centric. And we move more to this identify the critical assets. How can you protect something if you don't know what it is? But to put things into perspective, this standard had its genesis over 25 years ago. And that's a very long time in the digital world. I'm not saying it's not okay. I'm a ISO 27001 lead auditor. It's a good starting point, but again, it was written back in a time where most organizations didn't even have probably a security organization or a CISO, right? So a lot has evolved over time. And the other thing, which I believe is way more important, is that compliance is minimum denominator security, is what we as a society all agree that everybody should have, right? And let me give you an example outside security. So for you to be compliant when you're driving your car, you have to wear your seatbelt. That doesn't mean you are safe. That doesn't mean you cannot have an accident. What it means is that you're complying with the law. Of course, it's going to help you, but very far away from being the safest thing, right? There are other things that could give you and will contribute for your safety, right? So again, compliance, and there is this big focus on compliance being the key engine in security for a lot of organizations. This is just, again, minimum denominator security. Okay, so in a way, security was easy back then, right? We were building things around infrastructure, trying to build impregnable solutions, thinking that we could protect everything. The CISO, in a way, was known as the chief no officer because he would just say no to a lot of things and kind of, we can't do that because it's not going to be safe. Security was all around the perimeter, very focused on the identify and protect, as I mentioned. A lot of the message was around fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Security being compliance driven, and IT being the entity accountable for security within the organization. So in a way, cybersecurity was kind of easy. If you had discipline, if you patched your systems, you had good protection, good discipline, good compliance, you were kind of okay. Breaches were sporadic, no big news, and the CISO role was pretty stable, or so we thought. However, as you can imagine, things changed dramatically, and with COVID-19, they accelerated even further. So it kind of started with big news around highly sophisticated attacks performed by nation states, threat actors. I have a couple of examples there. Stuxnet, which got a major media attention because it was performed by a nation state on the uranium enrichment facility, which delayed substantially the Iranian nuclear program. Then we started hearing about advanced persistent threats, and we started with APT1 and 2 and 3 and so on, activism. And then big breaches started to appear on the news, right? Target in USA was probably one of the first ones that by the size and magnitude. But since then, the pace of new breaches just started increasing. And nowadays, it's no longer such big news because every single day someone got breached and it's news, right? It's just as we move forward, this is becoming a day-by-day event that keeps happening. It's no longer such big news as before. So a lot of security practitioners started saying it's no longer a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Well, what I've been advising my clients is that you need to think even further. You need to think, and you need to be prepared for how many they are going to happen per year, how many they are going to happen per month, how many they will eventually happen per week. But let me go a little bit deeper into this concept, right? And this is really key around being resilient. So being in a world that is completely interconnected with just-in-time supply chains, just-in-time manufacturing. It just means that we live in a world where the risks are interconnected, right? In this digital world, again, of everything being just in time, we in the interconnected world means interconnected risks. It means that um, it no longer matters how resilient you are alone. You also have to think, you might have the best security in the world, the best protection in the world, but you also need to think about third parties because you are interconnected, and being interconnected means interconnected risks. So you also need to look to your supply chain. You also need to look to the resilience of your supply chain, because then becomes the attack factor. And that's precisely what happened with Target, where hackers broke via the AC air conditioning company. So if this was paramount before COVID, now COVID-19 brought things to a completely new level. The way our world is interconnected accelerated how fast COVID-19 spread across each country, across the world, and how it brought an unprecedented disruption to supply chains. And again, putting things a little bit in a funny way, but it's an example that everybody gets. So just I could be talking about the disruption that happened in the tech industry with mobile phones being delayed, in car manufacturing, but let's just look at toilet paper. With all the consumer panic that happened, plus the disruptions across the entire supply chain from manufacturing to distribution, this led to a unique situation that even one of the most basic commodities like toilet paper, there were disruptions pretty much all over the world and was not available for several weeks. And to make things even more interesting for the bad guys, in order for most organizations, in order to keep millions of employees productive during lockdown, all companies that could do it, they implemented work from home. And a lot of them, they rushed into it. They didn't actually have the plans in place and the capacity to deal with this huge spike in remote working. And they just rushed in implementing this remote work facility with laptops, with VPN connections and so on, which massively increased the attack surface, which again was not designed in the best possible way. So let me go back again to the concept of resilience. And now, more than ever, we need to build systems and processes for speed and resilience. What really harms a company, an organization, is not the breach by itself. It is the dwell time. It is the time that a threat actor goes undetected and unnoticed inside the organization. That's what really harms, right? And every year, there security organizations that publish this number, it went from hundreds of days to being around 50. Again, each organization has slightly different numbers, but you would have potentially a threat actor for 50 days completely undetected on average inside the organization. And that's what creates the damage, is not the breach for itself. It's 50 days doing pretty much what he wants, exfiltrating data and bringing disruption to the business, and trying to stay as persistent as unnoticed as possible. So resilience is really about in being able to resist to these things. As Confucius said 2,500 years ago, is not about never falling, is not about never getting breached. You're going to fall down and you're going to get breached. It's just inevitable. But resilience is about rising, is about detecting, is about responding every time we fall, every time there is a breach. Because you cannot stop all the breaches, but you can improve how you rise. And you have to do it as fast as possible. And I always carry this ball with me in all my keynotes across the world, right? The ball is going to fall down. It's just inevitable. right? What really matters is how fast you bring it back up, right? That's the essence of resilience in cybersecurity. The ball, you're going to get breached. The ball is going to fall down. But in an ideal world, the ball bounces back so fast that you probably didn't even notice it. It will be in a world where there will be enough automation and enough automation in response, in detection and response, that the ball might fall down, but it just rises as fast as possible, right? So that's the concept of resilience in cybersecurity. It's, you can try to prevent the ball from falling down with identify and protect, but it's all about detecting that the ball is falling down and then making sure that response is so fast that the ball doesn't stay down. This is the dwell time. This is what brings harm to the organization. So having this in mind, to be resilient, we must assume a state of compromise. We must assume that, again, the ball is going to fall down several times per year, several times per month eventually. We need to build our systems and our processes in a way that minimizes dwell time. And to do that, we must fuse detection and response. These teams need to work side by side. We need to minimize the time it takes to detect and minimize the time it takes to respond. And security has this big problem of perception of value, right? Every year the CISO gets asked, he spends millions and he gets asked, the board asks him, can you tell us if you are now safer? You just spend millions. Can you really have that for sure? But perception only happens when you need to respond. And let me give you an example. I keep saying that the most useless thing you do in IT is doing backup until the day you have to restore. The day you have to restore your files is when you really are grateful that you have been doing backup. So you don't perceive the value of backup when you do the backup. You don't perceive the value of security when you're implementing security. You perceive the value when you have to recover, when you have to respond, right? And that's why the goal today is to build security organization having digital resilience in mind, including supply chain, assuming a state of compromise, having the CISO as a business partner, as an enabler of the digital transformation in the organization, focus around the protection of the user with zero trust models, focus on this detection and response and minimizing the time. This is really key, more now with COVID-19. Focusing on visibility, on confidence, assurance, response, being response ready, having defensibility, and basically have security being driven by maturity, not compliance. And the owner of security is more and more at the C-level and the board. So again, resilience is the key, right? You cannot stop the breaches. It's just completely impossible. You can minimize them, but you won't be able to stop them all. It's about being resilient, being able to recover as fast as possible and detecting as fast as possible. Okay, and that's my presentation. With this, I will move to the Q&A session.
Thank you, Mr. Pereira. We will now join Mr. Stephen Sim, our moderator, to take on the questions from the attendees. Mr. Sim, please.
Marco, for the wonderful presentation. I think many of the points you mentioned resonated with me. I fully agree with you that an assumed breach approach is necessary in today's world to achieve resilience. So let me first start off with this question. Okay. Do you see cyber incident playbooks, tabletop exercises, and incident drills extending to the supply chain, including CSPs or cloud service providers, MSPs, and ISPs? What is your take in the maturity in this space?
So first, let me just to thank everybody for attending the presentation. It's been a pleasure to be here. Tabletops and being prepared, resilience is all about being prepared for when things go bad, right? One of the examples that I gave was the importance of the restore, right? The value when doing backup is when you do the restore. So preparing the teams to respond and having the playbooks and the tabletop exercises, which should be done from board level across the entire organization, is absolutely key. And something that we saw during COVID-19 is how weak are the supply chains when there is this big surge in demand, for instance, with toilet paper, something as simple as that. So yes, absolutely. Depending on what your contract allows, right, as you start putting third parties, but definitely trying to have, in an interconnected world, just in time world, we have interconnected risks, and therefore we need to test the resilience of those interconnects.
Next question, how have you seen the take-up for incident response or IR and forensic retainers, IR forensic retainers, with this post-COVID situation that we're seeing right now, COVID and post-COVID situation? Do you see more organizations building their own forensics capabilities during this period or outsourcing it? What is your take on this?
Yep. So the vast majority, I think most organizations do realize that doing forensic analysis is something that requires really a lot of expertise. And because of chain of custody, being able to actually preserve evidence in a way that is acceptable by the court is something that, unless you have been really trained, you're not going to do well. And that's why a lot of the forensics individuals that we have at Trustwave, for instance, they have, not all of them, but lots of them have background in law enforcement. So what we have been seeing is an increase in the FIR and digital forensics and incident response services, but being used by a third party like ours, but not actually companies building them inside their organization.
Okay. Thanks for that. We have one question that has come through as well. When it comes to security, we are talking about maturity and not just coming from a compliance-driven aspect. I understand where this question is coming from, because even for ISACA, we advocate a risk-driven approach rather than a compliance. It's not a checkbox approach. So the question over here is, how important do you think it is for a company or an enterprise to assess their maturity in security? And how do you get the buy-in or the support from the board or the senior management?
I think it's one of the most important things. Solving problems, then that's what consultants do for a living. Usually it's done on three key parts: understanding the as is, defining the to-be model, the future mode, and then doing the gap analysis and the roadmap. Without understanding what problems you have today, how can you solve them? It's absolutely key to understand the maturity so that you can improve. Without understanding the as is, then you can't actually really build a strategic roadmap of improvement. So I think that's one of the most fundamental things that companies should do, is a maturity assessment to understand that journey.
Thank you very much, Marco. I think these are all very important takeaways for the audience. If you have burning questions, I think feel free to approach Marco via his email or LinkedIn. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you. Thank you.